My dear friends, I write to you from a place of quiet peace now, but the journey here was paved with tears I never thought I'd shed. At 73, I believed I understood the weight of sacrifice, the depth of love, and the meaning of family. How wrong I was. Let me tell you about the daughter I raised twice. Once as a child, then again as a struggling young mother who needed her mama more than she'd ever admit. Sarah came into this world screaming, demanding attention from her very first breath. Her father, God rest his soul, used to joke that she'd inherited my stubborn streak and his dramatic flair. We lost him when Sarah was only 12, leaving me to navigate single motherhood with a paycheck that barely covered our needs and a heart that ached for the man who'd promised to grow old beside me. Those were lean years. I worked double shifts at the textile factory, my fingers raw from the machines, my back screaming from the long hours. But Sarah needed dance lessons, needed the pretty dress for homecoming, needed to feel like other kids whose families hadn't been torn apart by cancer. So I gave her those things, even when it meant eating beans and rice for weeks, even when it meant my own dreams of night school faded like morning mist. When Sarah graduated high school, I thought I'd done it, raised a daughter who could stand on her own 2 feet. She was beautiful, smart, full of fire and ambition. I was so proud when she got that scholarship to the state university. Finally, I thought, she'll have the life I couldn't give myself. But life has a way of humbling our assumptions. Sarah came home pregnant at 19, eyes red from crying, clutching a positive pregnancy test like it was a death sentence. The boy, I refused to call him a man, had vanished the moment she told him, leaving her to face the consequences alone. That night, she collapsed in my arms like she was 12 again, and I held her while she sobbed about ruined dreams and uncertain futures. "We'll figure it out," I whispered into her hair, already calculating how I could rearrange my life to catch her fall. We always do. Little Emma arrived that spring, tiny and perfect, and needing everything we had to give. Sarah struggled with postpartum depression, spending days in bed while I juggled work and nighttime feedings. I didn't mind. Babies are blessings, and Emma was sunshine itself. Her laugh could chase away the darkest clouds, her tiny fingers wrapping around mine with such trust it made my heart ache. "Mom, I don't know how to do this," Sarah would whisper during those long nights when Emma wouldn't settle. "You learn," I'd tell her, bouncing the baby while Sarah tried to sleep. Love teaches you everything else. When Emma was 2, Sarah met David at her new job. He was kind, steady, everything the first boy wasn't. They married when Emma was 4, and I stood beside them at the altar, grateful my daughter had found someone who saw her worth. 2 years later, little Michael joined us, then baby Lucy 3 years after that. Our house overflowed with noise and laughter, birthday parties and Christmas mornings. I was Grandma Rosie, the one who always had cookies in the oven and Band-Aids for scraped knees. I drove carpools, attended school plays, babysat whenever Sarah and David needed time alone. "You're incredible, Mom," Sarah would say, hugging me tight after I'd handled some crisis or celebration. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Those words filled me with purpose. I'd found my place in this new version of family, and it felt like everything I'd sacrificed had led to this beautiful, chaotic, love-filled life. But somewhere along the way, the dynamics shifted in ways I was too wrapped up in, loving to notice. It started small. Sarah would make plans without asking if I was available, then seem surprised when I couldn't drop everything to help. She'd schedule family photos without mentioning them to me until afterward. Birthday parties that I'd helped plan and prepare for suddenly had limited space, and somehow I was the one who understood when the invitation got lost in the shuffle. "You understand, right, Mom?" she'd say with that smile that used to melt my heart. "It's just immediate family this time." Immediate family. The word stung, but I swallowed the hurt and nodded. After all, I reasoned, she had her own family now. I was just the grandmother, the helper, the one who filled in gaps when needed. The children grew older, their lives fuller with school activities and friends. They still loved their Grandma Rosie, but I could feel the distance growing. Not their fault. Children naturally pull away as they discover their own independence. But it left me feeling increasingly like a relic from their past rather than a vital part of their present. David was always polite, always grateful for my help, but I sensed his discomfort with how often I was around. He'd never say anything directly, but I caught the looks he'd exchange with Sarah when I'd arrive unannounced or stay too long during family dinners. "Maybe you should call first, Mom," Sarah started saying. "We're getting busier, and it's hard when you just show up." So I started calling first. Then I started being told they were busy more often than not. Family dinners became less frequent. The grandchildren's school events somehow got harder to coordinate around everyone's schedules. I told myself this was natural. Families evolve, children grow up, parents get busy. I was being sensitive, reading too much into normal growing pains. But the truth was crystallizing in moments I tried to ignore. Like when Emma got her first period and Sarah handled it without telling me until weeks later. Or when Michael made honor roll and I heard about it from a neighbor who'd seen the Facebook post. Or when Lucy started kindergarten and I realized I'd been excluded from the milestone shopping trip for her first school supplies. "I thought David's mom might want to come," Sarah explained when I asked. "She doesn't get to do as much with the kids." David's mom, Nancy, lived 2 hours away and visited maybe once a month. But she was David's mother, which apparently gave her a claim to experiences I'd been having for years. The final shift came last spring when Sarah announced they were planning a big family reunion for David's side. A weekend at a lake house, 3 generations gathering to celebrate David's parents' 40th anniversary. "That sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely happy for them. "You'll have to tell me all about it when you get back." Sarah's face went strange, like she was working through a complex math problem. "Actually, Mom, Nancy specifically asked if you'd like to come. She said you're practically family too." Practically family. The qualifier hit me like a physical blow, but I managed to smile and accept the invitation graciously. The weeks leading up to the reunion were filled with preparation. Sarah asked me to help with food preparation, organizing gifts, coordinating travel arrangements. I threw myself into the tasks, grateful to feel useful and included. But 3 days before we were supposed to leave, I overheard the conversation that changed everything. I'd come by to drop off the photo albums Sarah had asked me to organize. Pictures spanning the kids' entire lives, most of them taken by me, many of them featuring me. I was in the kitchen, humming while I arranged them chronologically, when I heard Sarah's voice from the living room. She was on the phone, and I could hear David's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out his words. I know, Sarah was saying, her voice tight with frustration. "But Nancy specifically invited her, and now I can't uninvite her without looking like a complete bitch." A pause. David's voice, muffled but clearly agitated. "I've tried hinting," Sarah continued. "But she doesn't take hints. She never has. She just inserts herself into everything." My hands stilled on the photo albums. In the picture I was looking at, 5-year-old Emma was hugging me tight, both of us covered in flour from a baking disaster that had ended in giggles and cookies shaped like abstract art. "David, please," Sarah's voice was getting more strained. "I can't deal with this drama right now. The kids are excited about the trip, and if I start making changes, they'll ask questions." Another pause. Then David's voice, clearer now, as he must have moved closer to the phone. "Just tell her there's not enough room in the car, or that we need to leave earlier than planned. Something. And what happens when she offers to drive herself, or take the bus? You know how she is. She'll find a way to make it work because she always does." I felt like I was disappearing, becoming invisible while they discussed me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person who'd spent decades loving them. "Look," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper I had to strain to hear. "I'll handle it. I'll call Nancy and explain the situation. Tell her we appreciate the invitation, but it's probably better if we keep it to actual family this time." The silence stretched. Then David's voice again, softer now. "You're right. It's nothing personal. It's just, she's not really family, you know? Not the way Nancy is. And this is Nancy's thing, her anniversary celebration. It should be about David's actual family." "Exactly," Sarah agreed, relief evident in her voice. "Don't bring her. She's not real family. Nancy will understand. She was just being polite anyway." "Don't bring her. She's not real family." The words echoed in my mind as I stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at decades of photographs that suddenly felt like evidence of a life I'd imagined rather than lived. Not real family. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up with sick babies while Sarah slept. The recitals I'd attended, the games I'd cheered at, the tears I'd dried, the Christmas mornings that started at my house because that's where the magic happened, the birthdays I'd planned and paid for, the clothes I'd bought, the college funds I'd contributed to, even when my own savings dwindled. I thought about the day Emma fell off her bike and needed stitches, how she'd cried for Grandma Rosie while Sarah was at work, the time Michael had nightmares and would only sleep peacefully when I told him stories about his grandfather he'd never met, the way Lucy still brought me dandelions she'd picked, believing they were the most beautiful flowers in the world, not real family. I set the photo albums down carefully, my hands trembling slightly. In the living room, Sarah was still talking, planning how to uninvite me without causing too much disruption to their weekend. They were being practical, I realized. From their perspective, I was an obligation, a leftover from Sarah's past that had overstayed its welcome in her present. I walked to the kitchen counter where I'd left my purse and keys. My movements felt mechanical, like I was floating outside my body, watching myself react to a pain so deep it had gone numb. "Sarah," I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm leaving the albums on the counter. I need to go." "Okay, Mom," she called back absently, still focused on her phone conversation. "Thanks for organizing them. See you later." "See you later." Such casual words for what would be our last normal interaction. I drove home in a daze, the familiar streets blurring through tears I hadn't realized I was crying. At home, I sat in my living room, the same room where I'd rocked all 3 grandchildren as babies, where we'd built pillow forts and read bedtime stories, and let the full weight of what I'd heard settle over me. They didn't want me there. Not really. I was a burden they were too kind to discard directly, but too tired to include genuinely. All these years, I'd thought I was building a legacy of love. Instead, I'd been building a house of cards that had just collapsed with a few thoughtless words. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the darkness, replaying every interaction, every holiday, every moment when I'd felt that subtle shift in their attitudes. The signs had been there, building like storm clouds on the horizon, but I'd been too busy loving them to notice the weather changing. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called Sarah around 10, after the kids would have left for school and David for work. "Hi, Mom," she answered, her voice bright and cheerful. "What's up?" "I wanted to call about the reunion," I said, keeping my tone light and casual. "I've been thinking about it, and I realized I have some conflicts that weekend. I don't think I'll be able to make it after all." The silence stretched for a moment. Then, "Oh, are you sure? I mean, Nancy was really looking forward to meeting you." The lie came so easily to her, layered over yesterday's conversation like paint over rust. "I'm sure," I said. "You all have a wonderful time. Give everyone my best." "Well, if you're certain." She sounded relieved despite her words. "Maybe next time." "Maybe," I agreed, knowing there wouldn't be a next time. Not like this. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet house and began to plan. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hurt them or make them feel guilty. I just wanted to stop pretending that I belonged somewhere I clearly didn't. More than that, I wanted to rediscover who I was when I wasn't trying to be indispensable to people who saw me as disposable. The next few weeks, I began pulling back quietly. When Sarah called asking if I could babysit last minute, I politely declined, citing prior commitments. When she suggested family dinner, I begged off, saying I was feeling under the weather. When the kids called asking to visit, I gently redirected them to activities with friends their own age. I wasn't being cruel or dramatic. I was simply stepping back, giving them space to be the family they'd defined themselves as, one that didn't include me as a central figure. During this time, I started reconnecting with parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. I joined a book club at the library, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I started taking watercolor classes at the community center, discovering a talent I'd never known I possessed. I began volunteering at the local animal shelter, where my love was welcomed without qualification or condition. Most importantly, I started writing. Letters, stories, memories of my own childhood and early marriage. I wrote about my mother, my grandmother, the women who'd shaped me before I'd become so consumed with shaping others. I wrote about dreams I'd deferred and interests I'd abandoned. I wrote about the person I'd been before I'd defined myself solely through my relationships to others. 3 months after the reunion I didn't attend, Sarah called. Her voice was different, smaller, more uncertain than usual. "Mom, I'm worried about you. You've been so distant lately. Are you okay?" I was in my art studio, the spare bedroom I'd converted into a creative space, putting finishing touches on a painting of the sunrise over the lake near my childhood home. The room smelled of watercolors and possibility. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, and meant it. "Just busy with some new projects." Projects? What kind of projects? I told her about the book club, the art classes, the volunteer work, about the writing I'd been doing and the photography class I was considering, about the trip to Europe I was planning for the following spring, a trip I'd dreamed about for 40 years, but never taken because there was always someone else's needs to consider first. "That sounds—" She paused, seeming to struggle for words. "That sounds really great, Mom. I'm glad you're doing things for yourself." But I could hear the confusion in her voice, the slight panic of someone who'd expected me to always be available and was suddenly confronting the reality that I might not be. "I should let you go," I said gently. "I have book club tonight, and I still need to finish the reading." "Oh, okay. Maybe we could have dinner this weekend? The kids miss you." "I'll check my calendar and call you back," I promised. I did check my calendar, and I did call her back. But for the first time in years, I didn't rearrange my life to accommodate theirs. I had commitments now, friendships that weren't based on obligation, activities that fed my soul rather than depleted it. The hardest part was the grandchildren. Emma, now 16, called one evening, her voice thick with tears. "Grandma Rosie, Mom says you're too busy to see us anymore. Did we do something wrong?" My heart broke all over again, but this time it was a clean break, not the jagged tear of betrayal I'd felt months earlier. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, settling into my favorite chair, the one I'd moved to face the window where I could watch the birds at my new feeders. "You didn't do anything wrong. I love you so much, and I always will. But I'm learning how to take care of myself too, and sometimes that means I can't always be available the way I used to be." "But you're our grandma," she said, as if that explained everything. "Yes, I am. And being your grandma is one of the greatest joys of my life. But I'm also Rosie, and I'm learning who Rosie is when she's not just someone's mom or grandma." We talked for an hour about growing up, about finding yourself, about the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in loving them. By the end of our conversation, Emma sounded like she understood, at least a little. "I'm proud of you, Grandma Rosie," she said before hanging up, "for doing stuff just for you." Those words meant more to me than any gratitude I'd ever received for my sacrifices. The reunion happened without me. I saw the photos on Sarah's social media, beautiful pictures of 3 generations gathered around a lake, laughing and hugging and creating memories. Nancy was in many of the pictures, clearly having a wonderful time with her actual family. I felt a pang of sadness, but not the devastating grief I'd expected. Instead, I felt something like relief. They'd had their perfect family weekend, and I'd had a quiet weekend of painting and reading and calling my sister in Arizona, a relationship I'd been neglecting for years. That autumn, I made a decision that surprised even me. I put my house on the market. It was too big for one person, too full of memories that belonged to a version of myself I no longer was. I found a lovely apartment near downtown, walking distance from the library and the art center, with a small balcony perfect for morning coffee and bird watching. Sarah was shocked when I told her. "But Mom, this is our family home. Where will we have Christmas? Where will the kids come to visit?" "You'll have Christmas at your house," I said simply, "and the kids can visit me at my new place. It has a guest room." "But it won't be the same," she protested. "No," I agreed. "It won't be." The sale of the house gave me enough money to pay off my debts and start fresh. I bought quality art supplies, a good camera, and a laptop for the writing I'd been doing. I also set up college funds for each of the grandchildren, funds they wouldn't know about until they were 18, gifts with no strings attached. On moving day, Sarah came to help pack. She moved through the rooms like she was in a museum, touching surfaces and staring at walls as if trying to memorize them. "I always thought this place would be here forever," she said, standing in the kitchen where she'd eaten thousands of meals, where I'd taught her to bake, where we'd had our deepest conversations. "Nothing is forever," I said, wrapping the last of my grandmother's china. "But the love that happened here, that's not tied to the walls. You can take that with you wherever you go." She helped me load the last boxes, her movements slow and reluctant. As we stood in the empty living room, she suddenly started crying. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I don't know for what exactly, but I feel like I should be sorry." I hugged her then. This daughter I'd raised and loved and sometimes resented and always forgiven. She felt smaller in my arms than she had in years, like the uncertain young woman who'd come home pregnant and afraid. "You don't need to be sorry for growing up," I told her. "You don't need to be sorry for having your own life. You just need to be happy." "But I want you to be happy too," she said. "I am," I realized as I said it. I finally am. My new life unfolded slowly, like a flower opening to sunlight after years in shadow. I joined a hiking group for seniors and discovered I loved being outdoors. I started attending poetry readings at the coffee shop downtown and eventually worked up the courage to read some of my own work. I made friends, real friends, not just the parents of my grandchildren's friends or the neighbors I'd known for decades. Margaret, from book club, became my closest friend. She was a retired teacher who'd never married, who'd traveled the world and lived boldly and unapologetically. She taught me how to be single without being lonely, how to fill my days with purpose that came from within rather than from others' needs. "You're blooming," she told me one day as we sat by the river, sketching the changing leaves. "It's beautiful to watch." I saw Sarah and the grandchildren regularly, but on different terms. They came to my apartment for dinner, marveling at the art on my walls, my art created by my own hands. They flipped through photo albums from my travels, listened to stories about my book club and hiking adventures, met my friends when they visited. "You're different, Grandma Rosie," Lucy said one evening, curled up next to me on my new couch. "You're more sparkly." "Sparkly?" I laughed. "Yeah, like there's light coming from inside you. Children see what adults miss." I was lighter, more luminous, because I'd finally learned to illuminate myself instead of reflecting others' light back at them. The real test came 18 months later, when Sarah called with news that would once have sent me into full grandmother mode. "Mom, I'm pregnant," she said, her voice trembling with excitement and terror in equal measure. "It wasn't planned, and David's freaking out because Lucy's only 8 and we thought we were done, but I'm happy. Scared, but happy." My first instinct was to offer everything, my time, my money, my complete availability. But I caught myself. "That's wonderful news," I said. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, overwhelmed, like I'm starting over at 42. "You'll be fine," I assured her. "You're an excellent mother, and David's a good father. You've got this. But what if I need help? What if I can't manage everything?" "Then you'll figure it out," I said. "And if you need specific help with specific things, you can ask me, and I'll see what I can do." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not going to automatically offer to move in and take over?" "No," I said, smiling. "That's not what you need from me anymore." "How do you know what I need?" "Because I've learned the difference between what people need and what they want. And I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people solve their own problems." When baby James arrived that summer, I visited the hospital bearing gifts, a handmade quilt I'd sewn myself, a photo album for recording his first year, and a card containing a check for the college fund I'd started in his name. "I want to be his grandmother," I told Sarah as I held the tiny, perfect baby. "But I don't want to be his caretaker. I want to spoil him and love him and hand him back to his parents when he needs changing." Sarah laughed through her tears. "I think I'm okay with that." 2 years later, I published my first book, a collection of essays about love, loss, and self-discovery called Letters from Grandma. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its audience among women who recognized themselves in my stories. I got letters from daughters who'd realized they'd been taking their mothers for granted, from mothers who'd lost themselves in loving others, from grandmothers who were learning to bloom in their golden years. The book launch party was held at the local bookstore, and I was touched when Sarah and David brought all the children. They sat in the front row as I read from my favorite essay, a piece about learning to love yourself the way you love others, with patience and forgiveness and unwavering commitment. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," Sarah said afterward, hugging me tight. "I never knew you were a writer." "I never knew either," I admitted. "I guess we're both still learning who we are." Now, at 76, I write these words from my study, surrounded by paintings I've created and books I've written. Outside my window, the birds come to the feeders I've hung, and I know each of their songs. In an hour, I'll meet Margaret for our weekly hike. Tonight, I'll attend a poetry reading where I might share something new I've written. Tomorrow, Emma will bring her baby, my first great-grandchild, to visit. She's named him after his great-grandfather, the man who died too young, but whose love story with me gave her the template for the beautiful marriage she's built. She's taken my advice about not losing herself in motherhood, maintaining her friendships and hobbies, even as she navigates new parenthood. "You taught me that," she told me. By example. Sarah and I have found our balance. We love each other deeply, but we no longer expect each other to be everything. She's learned to ask for help when she needs it, rather than assuming I'll anticipate her needs. I've learned to offer support without sacrificing my own well-being. We're both better for it. The other day, I was showing James, now a curious 2-year-old, how to feed the birds when he asked, "Grandma Rosie, why do you live alone?" "Because I like my own company," I told him, watching his face scrunch up as he tried to understand. "And because sometimes, when you live alone, you learn that you're actually pretty good company for yourself." He nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "Will you teach me how to be good company for myself?" he asked. "I will," I promised. "But first, you need to learn how to be good company for others. The rest comes later." As I write this, I realize that the moment I overheard Sarah's words, "Don't bring her, she's not real family," was the moment I began to save myself. Not from them, but from the version of myself that had forgotten she was worth saving. I am real family. I'm real family to myself, first and foremost. Everything else flows from that fundamental truth. The pain of that day has transformed into something unexpected. Gratitude. Gratitude for the wake-up call that led me to this richer, fuller life. Gratitude for the relationship I've built with myself, the friendships I've forged, the art I've created, the words I've written. I am not the same woman who stood in that kitchen, heartbreaking over photographs and promises that were never quite what they seemed. I am not the same woman who defined herself solely through her service to others. I am Rosie, writer, artist, friend, hiker, grandmother, dreamer. I am enough, all by myself, and that, my dear friends, is the most beautiful discovery of all. With love and light, Grandma Rosie.